Well, we are going to rush through this a little bit, so I apologize if my pace is a little bit fast. But it's a joy to be here. It's a joy to connect. It's really neat to see this whole piece of kind of unity in Christ celebrated in different ways. And when James asked if I'd share a little bit in the participation here, I really enjoyed the opportunity to try to connect with the life of international church contexts and how we can leverage our working together. Just give a little bit of introduction about myself as a picture of our family. We've got 3 kids and 9 grandkids. And it's a joy to kind of be at this stage of life. I've kind of structured every aspect of my life in the kind of the grandparent mode. So our ministry primarily now is come alongside and launch the next generation. Probably half of what I do is regarding a Masters of Organizational Leadership program that is in 18 countries around the world. We're just about to launch it in Latin America. That'll expand with that. About 1,000 students in that. I serve as the academic dean for that program. In fact, next week I'll be in Manila meeting with that group and helping that. And Debbie's really involved in an inner life discipleship program called Untying the Knots of the Heart that really goes to those places where we have never resolved how the gospel intersects with our brokenness. So we'd love to chat with any of you on those kind of things. We've done that quite a bit in China as well as in the United States, and we're about to roll that out in Latin America as well. We're excited in where that's going. So quick overview of us. We served for 11 years in Ecuador, and I was against the idea of international churches during that time. I felt that international churches were a distraction. It kept missionaries from being engaged in local ministry. I was in a very different context. And then God moved us from there to Moscow, Russia. And in Russia, I had a conversion experience. And I began to see that international churches were not only important and helpful, but strategically necessary. And our 6 years in Russia, after 11 years in Ecuador, 6 years in Russia, were just a wonderful, rich, growing time for us. Our children would say those were the best years of our ministry. So 2 of our children graduated from high school in Russia, and then we moved to Budapest, Hungary, and we were part of the Danube Church in Budapest for 3 years. And brought Ronnie on board. We're delighted about that. We actually were in Moscow after the Stevens left. Got to know Kostya during that time, and Oleg in the back, and that was a rich experience, our time in Moscow, then followed up by Budapest. So I'm a champion for international churches right now, recognizing this is the right time. And so delighted that, Jim, you completed your dissertation, your thesis research on that, and we'll be talking some more about that in the next subject, in the next session. So I want to bring some of those themes that come out of your study that also have intersected with this area that I've been really concerned. How do we work together in a healthier way in terms of our multicultural dynamics in our leadership teams? Delightful to hear all the different nationalities represented in your church. We'll be talking some more about that in the next session I do. But all of you have this mix. And how do you manage the mix? How do you learn from the mix? And what's the character and nature of those dynamics? So the interpersonal communications and inevitable conflict, I'd say if you're not having conflict in your churches, you're not learning. You're not growing. You are probably dominating it. I mean, it's possible you're so purely holy that you're having a highly complementary relationship. But I would imagine there's some deeper things that need to be looked at there. So that's just a quick introduction. Most of this session, I wanted to focus on an experiential, interactive learning opportunity for us to gain a clearer understanding of ourselves. I've been, I guess, starting probably about in my upper 30s, where on one hand I had really been successful in ministry leadership, and yet I was also running into some of my brokenness coming into conflict with others. And so there was some failure that was coming in there. And I also was observing brokenness in my parents as I saw them in my home church in a church conflict. And I saw in my parents that they, I would say, were in the doctrinal and organizational way, they were right in the conflict, but their hearts were wrong. And how could that be, that we could be right and wrong at the same time? And then I began to realize the same pattern that they had, I had. And so there were parallels in me. We were talking last night about that growth trajectory that kind of started late 30s, around age 40 for me, of connecting the gospel at deeper levels. And so this question, what is it like to be on the other side of Dave Bochman? What is it like to be on the other side of Ken Blake? What is it like to be on the other side of you? And so this exercise we'd like to take you through is something that we've done in multiple cultural contexts. We've done it in some marriage retreats. We've done it in leadership team contexts and that kind of thing. But the objective is to help you begin to pay attention to things about yourself and how you communicate together with other people that you may not realize. And it's kind of a fun exercise. It's kind of a thing. Unfortunately, this room is a little bit tight, so it'll be interesting to see how it goes. But Debbie, come on up and help me with that. You know, when we are in pain, or when we're not in pain, when we're stress-free, it's fairly easy to be a good Christian. It's fairly easy to be a good communicator. When everything is going well, all of those things seem to be functioning well. But however, when things are stressed, we can fall into ineffectual communication patterns that date back to the beginning of mankind. So we're going to use a model that actually comes out of Genesis chapter 3. And this isn't original with us. You may have had some exposure to these kind of things or mentioning in some messages before. And I'm struggling to read the laptop at that distance, but we'll see how it goes. After the fall, the man and the woman, here we go, that way, created to be glorious representatives of God's presence in the world, quickly became individuals who operated independently. As a team, they failed to handle the temptation placed before them by Satan, and, to put it mildly, they fell into ineffective relational patterns. We're not going to unpack all the other dynamics, but specifically think of the relational dynamics that were involved in that situation. In this fall, we can identify 4 examples of unhealthy relating and communicating. These patterns are exactly the same patterns plaguing relationships today. These 4 patterns, as they make their appearance in Genesis 3, are rationalizing, distracting, placating, and blaming. And I make a case that the distribution of these vary in different cultures, but you're going to have them present in all cultural contexts. And so the exercise we'll be going through will help us to explore that a little bit. So, you know the story, you know the picture, you know how that dynamic plays out. Let's see how it plays out in your interactions today. So we've got 4 actually kind of icons, 4 drawings to indicate how those types of relational interaction patterns play out. The rationalizer, the thoughtful pose, maybe the thinker, the distractor, the placating pattern, kind of that kneeling before and pleading, and then the blaming pattern. Some of us have really mastered those, and we'll have opportunities to get that. So I want to ask you a question. I want you to choose between one of these 4 options. See where you most identify yourself. And I'm thinking primarily when you are in a emotionally engaged in conversation or relationship dynamic. I would like you particularly to think about dynamics that happen within the leadership cluster of your church, but maybe you want to do it in terms of your marriage. Maybe you want to do it in terms of relationship with your children or however that would work. But we're talking about a close relational context and in which you feel some emotional content. When you are in a stress-filled conflict with a person you are in close relationship with, which one of the following would be your dominant relational tendency? Number 1, I try to get the other person to see my point of view, no matter how tense it gets. Okay. Number 2, I try to lower the tension by giving in during conflict, no matter what it costs me personally. Option 3, I try to use humor, questions, or some other type of distraction to lower the tension or to bring the end to the conflict. Are you seeing yourself yet? Number 4, I try to be non-emotional and give logical, well-thought-out arguments during conflicts. I encourage us to step away from the argument until we can calm down and reason better, actually hoping the conflict just goes away. All right. Does everybody have a number that identifies them?
Are we allowed to have 2?
That's a good question. Yes. I'd say choose one that you think is probably dominant. You may change later on as we go into it and see how that would go. I think it is common that often we'll have different levels and we fall back. And sometimes it depends on what kind of context and what kind of relationship we're in. Yeah. Yes? Right. We'll stick with the descriptions, and I'll repeat those in just a moment. Okay? So does everybody have a number identified where they're at? Yeah. Okay. How many people would say they're a number 1? Okay. I'm a number 1. Debbie's a number 1. Okay. How about number 2? Okay. How about number 3? Wow. All right. And number 4. Okay. Now we're going to ask you to get up and join your tribe. Okay. So I think let's do it this way. Let's have the number 1s cluster over here. The number 2s cluster back there. Let's have the number 3s cluster back there and the number 4s over here. So you'll have to leave your place a little bit. Do you have those papers? Yeah. So yeah, the number 1s will cluster here, 2, 3s, and 4s. Now, it's important that you're able to look at each other. I realize the room is a little bit large, so and there's some obstacles, the post in the middle, but try to position your chairs so you can look at each other. Did you bring that water up?
No, but I'll go get it.
Okay.